Welcome to week 12 of your History 1110 class. This week, we're all about the Crusades. So last week, you kind of read about Islamic nations, and how the idea of Islam is a very like five pillar, very peaceful type of thing, but some people interpret it very, very differently and led those nations to a very diverse type of thing. And how splits in the religion have led to new ideas, new leadership, and definitely the breakdown and the rise of different civilizations of that area. Well, this time we kind of focus more on Christianity and the kind of like terrible idea that the Crusades were like kind of like justified in that stuff. You got to remember, at this time, land equals power. At this time, everybody is trying to kind of like come up with a reason, come up with a thing to promote. And the biggest thing in everybody's life is religion. In Europe, Rome has fallen. So we're in like the late 400s, 476 era, and Rome has fallen. It's not like there was a plan for, okay, this group becomes this country and that group becomes this country and all of that. It was just utter chaos. And with Rome being like gone and that big void of power, it was, who do we turn to? Well, the most stable thing was the Catholic Church, was the Pope. The Pope was the like a major leader. It had he had the power, he had the ability to declare different things. And so we see all these small civilizations, small states pop up with leaders who were anybody and everybody. Basically, it was who could provide the most loot and who had the army to back up what they said and what they did. So all of these small groups basically were saying, this is what we're going to do. And they started to promote themselves. The ones who had the most success, the ones that got their name written down, were the ones who aligned themselves with the Pope, aligned themselves with the Catholic Church, and said, hey, we're going to give you that power, that tribute. We're going to make sure that there's that friendship between us. And that is why they rose, because the papal states, or the papacy, the church itself, was no longer just a religious entity. It was a like territorial power. King Pippin was the one who started this. His son, Charlemagne. Now, Charlemagne was one of those historical figures that just took over everything. A lot of people who have European ancestry are actually can date their ancestry back to Charlemagne. He had a lot of different kids, a lot of different bloodlines coming off of him. He is one of those that finally reunited Europe. For years, hundreds of years, they're all fighting, trying to figure out and determining, what are we going to be? What are we going to do? Charlemagne rises up very powerful and reunites in the 800s. So you can see, after Rome falls, it's been a bit. And the problem, not the problem, the idea in this time period is, we got to stick with us. We got to keep the status quo. So all this orange states, those are Catholic Christian nations rising up and saying, this is what we are. And the Eastern Roman Empire is still that. They're still in that Catholic papacy mode, but they're kind of starting to go away from it a little bit. We'll talk about that later. But all surrounding it is the Muslims, is Islamic faith. They're starting to say, hey, this new religion, it's taken off. They have very strong values, very good beliefs, and it's starting to kind of bother some of them. And then up here in Scandinavia, you have the Vikings. They're polytheistic, Thor, Odin, and they're starting to say, hey, we don't believe what you're believing. And they don't really do what everyone else did. And so we're starting to see a lot of mixture of what's going on, some problems, some ideas of they're not liking each other. And in fact, the people inside Europe weren't even liking each other, even though they were practicing similar religions because of feudalism. I like to call feudalism the feudal states, slavery with extra steps. So it was all about keeping the rich rich and the poor poor. It gave very small army. It gave armies to the rich people. So everyone started to like if you were rich, you're starting to rise in power, raise in notary. But if you were poor, there was no way you could get out of it. It was all about, hey, I own all the land, so I'm going to let you borrow some. Now you do the harvest and rent's due and you pay me. Oh, all of a sudden rent went up. All of a sudden you owe me for this and that. And pretty soon you're just always in debt to me, never being able to get out of it. And I'm just raking in all the money and doing none of the work. This expands to the Pope and the church itself. The church is at the top. We got the giant hierarchy pyramid. The Pope and the church is at the top because right now religion is one of the biggest things, if not the biggest things in people's lives. It is the most important thing. People are going to church, they're praying, they're listening to every word the Pope, bishops, the priests, everything's saying. They're not like really not questioning it at this point. And so all of a sudden, people are giving tribute and paying up to the church. The church becomes very rich and very, very powerful. And that kind of leads to some corruption as well. And people start like after a while, a couple hundred years go by, and people are like, wait a second, this church, the leaders, they're not doing what the Bible says. They're not doing what they're preaching. They're kind of getting kind of corrupted. And that allows Muslim states. If I scroll down a little bit, we can see. Oh, I gotta go a little further. Muslim states to enter Spain. Spain, a very Catholic European nation, but all of a sudden they rise up through Africa and they kind of take over and they start going, hey, now all of a sudden there's different things. And so the Catholic Church kind of like relooks at itself and they're like, we need to do some reforms. We need to make sure we get clarity and understand what we want. And it writes their moral compass, but it does promote holy wars because now we're splitting Western versus Eastern Church. And you saw that the Eastern Roman Empire was kind of arguing back and forth about things. And they start pulling away from everything. And they become the Eastern Orthodox Church. And that religion, that offshoot of Christianity starts to spread. And you can see here, this is a big idea of not only Eastern Orthodox, but the Muslim religion as well. And it's all centered right in there. You can see Jerusalem, the Holy Land. Now, depending on how you've researched the uh, Crusades in the past, really sees how people bring them up because some are like, oh, it was a great idea. It was a holy war. It was God's war. It was meant to be. It had to be done. And others like, it was the dumbest thing in the world. It was a waste of money. It was terrible. I personally believe it was more on the terrible side because it was a conflict of the three main religions at the time: Muslim, Judaism, and Christianity. And they all wanted the Holy Land, which is all right in this area: Israel, Jerusalem, down to Mecca, all right there, because that's where those religions really took off, really started. They trace their roots there and promote the ideas from that area. And so the Crusades were a whole bit about we want the Holy Land back because all the religions talk about pilgrimages, going to the Holy Land, revisiting their faith, showcasing where it be started. And all of them not organized. You can kind of see, once again, another huge look at the empires from the Muslim side of things. It's all right in there. Jerusalem. One thing with the Muslim empire at the time, it's starting to rise and fall. And so we see that division within its own self. And that kind of opens the Crusades to really promote themselves and push. And that's the thing. They go. It's like, we're going to take off. Let's get some. And you can see first, second, third, fourth. And there's like 7, 8, 9, 10. There's even a children's crusade. What the big thing shows is that a lot of atrocities took place during the Crusades. A lot of murdering, wiping out of people in certain areas, namely Jerusalem and the areas around them. Just disasters for each and every side. Saladin of the Byzantine Empire and kind of that Muslim rule made some pretty big progress. And in fact, it was the Third Crusade. Yep, the Third Crusade, where it was a disaster for the Christians, and it was just a lot of bad things people were doing. Like we said, those war crimes. You can use your imagination. You can read the chapters to see it. And King Richard the Lionheart. So King Richard of England. If you've seen The Lion King, the Lion, not Prince John, the Lion, was the one who came over, met with Saladin, and kind of calmed everything down. And they made a deal, and back and forth for years. It was one of those things where the Crusades, we get a lot of paintings and stuff like shown, and so that's kind of cool, but overall not good at all. Jihad, holy war were big things that they were promoting. Serfs, basically peasants who were a step above slavery. Chivalry was that big. Knights were huge during this time. It was their chance to get glory, and that's what the Crusades were all about. Can we get glory? The big argument was the Great Schism of 1054. I forgot to mention that. It was when East versus West kind of just came to a head, and they're like, nope, we're done. And they split. And that's where the Eastern Orthodox Church comes from. So the Crusades, like I said, waste of time, especially since nothing good got done from it. And it was just all about glory and trying to promote themselves and trying to just showcase their own power, even though they didn't really have much power, or try to gain more power. And there's just a lot of loss and a lot of destruction, and kind of set this tone for what we kind of see now. Is still that area is full of conflict, full of arguments between who owns what religion is powerful, what religion should be there. And it's just constant conflict. You can see it time and time again. That's a nice little review of chapter 13. So make sure you read chapter 13 this week. You got a little quiz and a discussion post for you to write. With that, if you have any questions, always feel free to ask. Otherwise, have fun.